This video discusses how to read test scores from a file and manipulate the data. We read the data, make it available into our RAM memory. Inside of this memory, we will be able to calculate the average test scores. And not only that, while we are going to manipulate that file, we will check to see if that file that we're reading from exists. Once it exists, then we can go in and read line by line each of the data that are stored per line. So the next step would be to check the data type. So in the main program, we're going to check for the existence of an input file. Next, we will check to see what the data type is. That is, check to make sure we are entering numerical data and it is positive data. So I'm going to add in here numerical data, and for positive data, or numbers in this case. And then the last major task is going to be to calculate the average of those test scores. So the main program is going to call each of these individual sub functions or submodules. And one thing about the HIPO chart is that it does lay out the major tasks or how that program is organized. Checking for the existence of an input file, checking the data type, whether or not the user entered a numerical data value or a positive number, and finally we will calculate the average of the test scores. Specifically, the purpose of this program is to read the data from a file, make sure that file exists, to make sure that the data is numerical and it is a positive value that's being read, and then being able to calculate the average of those test scores. Now let's look at a design or a pseudocode to read the data from a file or the test scores. So we'll begin, and I'll just make this a boldface. We will have a function to check the existence of the file that we're going to be reading from, a function to check the float data type, check to see if the number read is a real or float positive value, and then we will have a function to calculate the test score average. In the main function, we will initialize the variables, and in the while loop we'll enter the name of the file where the data will be read from, and you want to check to make sure that it does exist. If the file does exist, we get out of it and go to the next section. Otherwise, we'll tell the program to break. The next step would be to enter the file name where the output will be written. When we check to see if the input file exists, we also want to make sure that the txt extension is added to that file, because wherever we're reading from or writing to, that file is going to be a notepad or some sort of a text file. In Python, we normally work with binary files. The content is either binary or text based when we're dealing with data. So the next step here would be to enter the file name where the output will be written. We also check to make sure that that file has a txt extension onto it. And we're going to use the with clause in this example. In previous examples, I just used the open, read or write, and close. When I use the with clause will allow us to open a file for reading, and once all the data that has been either written or read, the computer is going to automatically close that file after the last item has been read or the last item has been written to an external output file. So in the with clause we're going to write the separating line, write the header, write another separating line, read the first line. While there is data, we check the data type, and if that data is correct, we're going to count or keep a tally of each test, keep a running sum of the test scores. The reason for these is so that we can calculate the average. Write each test score, we're going to center it, so the work will be centered. We're going to read the next test score, and all of this is associated with the while loop. And the next step would be to write. We are not going to display anything on the screen necessarily. We're writing the results to a file. So we write a separating line. If the count, which is keeping a counter of the test score, as long as that count is greater than 0 rather, we will call the function to calculate the average of the test scores. And then we will write the average of the test scores. Otherwise, we would write a message indicating there are no valid scores to be found, so that we're not able to calculate the average. And the last step would be to write a separating line, and you may add or display on the console that we have finished processing the test scores, and the results will be stored to that designated output file that we tell the computer to use. The last step would be to end the main function, call or run the main function. And here where we say check the data file, that's calling a function to do that. So we'll just say call function for that. We're also calling a function to make sure that the file exists. If the file name exists, that's a function. Call the function to check to see if that file name exists. So that's another function. I'm going to go ahead on and just highlight that. So let's just add the underline to that. So because we have 3 functions, we want to make sure they are called under the main function. Call function to check to see if the file name exists. Call the function to check the data type and for positive numbers. And call the function to calculate the average of the test scores. We write the test scores because in this example we're not storing anything as a list, not yet. And after we call the function to calculate the average, we write the average. Otherwise, we say there are no functions that are appropriate. In other words, there are no values that are or no valid scores to be found to do any calculations. Write our separating line, and again we print on the screen that we finished the processing of the test scores, and the results will be stored to an output file. We end the main function. We call or run the main program, and we call that. We end the main program module, and we're at the end of our pseudocode. So take a look at that, and feel free to view this video to assist you with creating a pseudocode for the designated assignment.